All right. Thank you so much, Char and Mary Lou, for coming today through Zoom to present Duluth Aging Support's Community Conversations, Caregiver Tips from the Experts. Today, our focus is effective communication strategies, effective communication tips for older adult caregivers. Today is Tuesday, January 12th, 2021. I am Mimi Stender. I'm the Executive Director of Duluth Aging Support. And Char, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Char Johnson, the coordinator for Dementia Friendly Duluth and Victory Chorus, and a professional caregiver.
And Mary Lou, how about you?
I am a registered occupational therapist. I've been doing that job for 42 years. My passion has really been working with older adults for a long time, and I taught at the College of St. Scholastica for 20 years and did those gerontology parts of the program, always having students in some kind of a facility so they could get some hands-on experience with people. But I also personally have worked in the field in lots of different settings. My most recent position was up in the Lakeview Hospital in Two Harbors, working with the folks up there. Many of them are older adults. And my doctoral dissertation was on positive aspects of dementia caregiving, which I kind of thought, are people ever gonna find anything positive about this? So it's really working with older adults and trying to help make their lives better is really a passion of mine.
Wonderful. Well, we're so lucky to have the two of you today. I'm so excited for the caregivers who are watching to get some really great tips so they can more effectively provide care for their loved ones. I think both with dementia and older adults in general. So I'm going to go ahead and start the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me for a moment here. All right, I'm just going to do a quick check to make sure that you're seeing the same thing I am. Char and Mary Lou, if you give me a nod of your head, do you see the full PowerPoint? Yay. Yes. Okay. Well, we've pretty much already introduced ourselves, but I will just reiterate that Duluth Aging Support is really happy to be able to present to our community members who are caregivers some tips from our wonderful caregiver experts. Today's focus is on effective communication, and we've already introduced ourselves. Here's just the page that officially gives you our names. We've got Mary Lou Donovan and Char Johnson, and again, I am Mimi Stender. All right, Mary Lou, I think you've got the next page, so if you want to take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Mimi. I just thought it'd be kind of smart for us to all be on the same playing field here and really think about what is communication. And especially in this day and age, communication is really important. And when you're talking about working with older adults, there are a lot of things you can do to improve communication skills. But first of all, you have to really understand what communication is. And it really is about this having a sender, a messenger, and a recipient that you're trying to get some kind of meaningful information back and forth on. And it's interesting because we can say a lot, we can show a lot of nonverbal things, but really understanding from the recipient is the clincher. So you can talk all you want, but if the person's not understanding you, you might as well be speaking Greek to a non-Greek speaker, right? So the things that are challenging about communication a lot of times for our older adults are some of those normal aging changes that come up, like decreased sense of hearing, decreased sense of vision. We're going to talk about some of those things coming up and more in depth in later presentations. But, the thing that you have to remember is that it's obvious that people who are hard of hearing or deaf or visually impaired or blind all can communicate. So, those aren't totally stopgap measures, right? They have to do it in different ways. And today we're going to try to give you some ideas about how to foster that in a good way. The other thing that's really important to remember is that there are huge cultural differences in the ways that people communicate. You know, if you even think about the differences between large town or urban and rural, or people from different ethnic or religious or cultural groups, those are the things that we also have to keep in mind. You know, you might be communicating in your family's kind of keywords or jargon, but nobody else outside of the family would really understand that. So it's really important. That kind of leads into the next slide number 4 here, about real communication. Again, having to be that two-way street. So we have to think about what information is coming into the person and how they're processing it, and then the kind of message that they're giving us as output. So what people can take in really is depending upon where their sensory processing information is taking them, and you know, are they paying attention or not? Cognition, those things are really pretty important. So people have so they get information in, and then they have to process it to give us some kind of output. And it's really important for us to always remember that the only thing we can control from this sequence is the input that goes into that person, because we can't control what goes on in their brain. And if we want certain outputs from people, we have to make sure we're giving them the input so they can process it and give us the output, whether it's verbal or some kind of behavioral action. So those are things that are really important to think about. And then the other thing is that, and I mentioned it already, nonverbals and verbals. And we'll talk about that a little more here, but words can really mean different things to different people. And one example that I can give is when I've worked as an occupational therapist with people on toileting skills. Well, you know, there are a number of ways that you can refer to bowel movements or urinary movements, and you have to know what people are comfortable with. So, I mean, that's just a really dumb example, but it's a pretty realistic example, because if you use a word that might be familiar to you or you think is appropriate, the other person might not get it. So those are things you just really have to keep in mind. And on the next slide, what we're really wanting to know, emphasize here is the importance of making sure that the person who's actually both people sending and receiving the message have the best tools available to them. So, you know, if their hearing aids are there, do the batteries work? Are their glasses there? Are they on? Are they clean? All of those kind of things. And then for the eliminating background noise, I mean, I am 65 and a half now. And man, it's really hard for me to concentrate and pay attention if I'm in a room that is full of noise and crowdedness. And so, you know, that has to be really thought about too, is the environment that you're trying to deliver your message in. And good lighting is really important. As the person ages, glare becomes a real problem for people. So you don't want to have it in bright, you know, wonderful sunshiny day today, but you know, if you can't tolerate that glare, that's not very helpful too. And then the positioning counts. I mean, how many times have we talked to the back of people's heads or talked to them from the other room? And then it's like, what? Why didn't they understand and hear my message? So really think about that for positioning. And then the other thing that I find is so valuable is just really to slow down. Take a breath yourself. I just listened to this, actually there's a workshop from Minnesota Gerontological Society, and one woman suggested pausing 3 seconds before you try to elicit another response or say something else to the person. So, Char, what other things do you have to offer here?
Much of which I'll cover on my slides, so I don't think I have anything to add to your slides here.
Can I?
Okay.
I
Yeah,
would,
go
I
for
would
it.
love to ask a question. Today, we are in the middle of a pandemic and people are wearing masks. And it makes it very, very difficult, I believe, to communicate for some people. I think especially for an older adult who doesn't hear as well, if they can't see the face. Mary Lou, what are some thoughts that you have on ways to compensate to be able to get your message across?
You have to have really expressive eyes and body movements. And, this is a real challenge, for all of us. If we only had nice, clear plastic masks, and even the face shields in the hospitals and clinics, people are wearing both. So that doesn't really help to have the face shield when you have your mask over. So it really is going slower, making sure you enunciate, making sure you take time to, make sure that that person is receiving and understanding your message. And I'll get onto some of these other similar points coming up, but, it's taken time to, make sure it's getting through, the message is getting through, and really watching people's eyes to see if they're registering and understanding what you're saying. And you can say a lot through your eyes. Think about going into the grocery store, and if you're kind of trying to wheel your cart around, you're kind of, people are looking at you like, get the heck out of my way, or it's okay, go ahead. I mean, really can make a big difference with your facial expressions, even under the mask. So, and we won't have that mask forever, hopefully.
Right.
Not too long, but yeah, great question. Really
Right.
good question, Char.
And would hopefully. Okay, I will move the slide.
All right. So one of the things we have to remember is that 10% of our communication is verbal and 90% of it is nonverbal. But when we're using our verbal choices, really important for us to use what I call direct concrete language. And I'll give you some examples of that concrete language coming up. How you say things to people, your voice volume and the tone of your voice. Yes, I already asked you to pick up your clothes from the floor and before, and I've got this wonderful smile on my face, but my message and my voice expression didn't really say I was being too friendly about that. So volume and tone of voice is really key. So really, the thing that you want to think about doing is to start with open-ended questions, but you don't want too much of open-ended questions. You don't want to say, what do you think? How do we cure or get world peace today? Even to say, what do you want for lunch might be too broad and open for some people. So you have to understand where your person's abilities are at and say, you might have to narrow those choices down for them. So, what are the most important things to do today? Would it be, get some groceries, make supper, whatever. So you might end up giving them different kinds of cues, but to think about, there are open-ended questions and then kind of moderated or controlled open-ended questions. So you want to shoot for something like that. And, really nobody wants to be talked down or patronized. And it's so insulting to any of us if your caregiver is assuming you know what you want and not even bothering to ask. So really the important thing is to use active listening skills, and active listening skills really is about listening with all of our senses. And it's giving our attention to the speaker. It's giving them some feedback like nodding or uh-huhs. Yeah, I get that. So it's showing that a little bit of verbal and nonverbal signs of listening, kind of leaning into the speaker. I'm smiling, really good, making that good eye contact. Again, some things with your posture, leaning forward. And sometimes you might have to mirror what they're saying. And then again, kind of get the distractions out of the way. That's always an important thing. So if you're really wanting to get a message across, and pretty much any of us, we really need to think about repeating the key points of the message. If you've got this long message, maybe you'll say, okay, now the 3 most important things I had to tell you were A, B, and C. And can you tell me what those are? I mean, if you're really wanting to teach somebody something, you really need to say, now, what were the most important things you remember? What 3 things did you really appreciate there? And the other thing is to always back it up with multimedia. So giving people printed materials in large enough font, simple, clear, large size font with words that are understandable for a reading level. That can really also kind of nail your points home that you want to make. And those are things that are also additives to active listening. So summarizing, giving them clear points, those are always important. So let's see, this is This is a chart that I made up, and sometimes people don't understand what the difference is between an abstract and a concrete cue or support strategy. And there are different ways of giving cues to people. And an abstract cue might be referring to something like, oh, it's raining cats and dogs. And, you know, if a person is at a cognitive stage, especially where they're taking things literally, they might kind of think, oh my God, it's raining cats and dogs on me. So you might have to use more concrete terminology. It's raining really hard. There's a lot of water coming down. I mean, that's a real simple example of abstract and concrete. But when you're approaching how a person, giving a message to a person and wanting them to do something, I actually, as an occupational therapist, we do a lot of what we call task breakdown. And making my notes out for this talk, I wrote down the 12-step process to making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, giving different cues, which, you know, you think, oh, peanut butter and jelly sandwich is pretty easy. And it is if you know what to do and you can manipulate your hands, if you can find the objects in the cupboards and those kind of things. So those are multi steps that go into really successfully making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at home. And we can talk more about that at later dates. But, you know, sometimes an abstract cue could be something in writing, like remember your jobs today. Or sometimes it might be, again, the simple verbal direction. I'm going to go down the line here. So complex verbal direction. Okay, after making breakfast, I want you to strip the sheets off your bed and put them by the laundry, and then you can go do your puzzle. Multiple step direction. And then you'd go to verbal suggestions. What do you think about working on the puzzle today? So you're kind of giving people information. You're moving on to simple verbal directions when you just simplify those things and just maybe give them two directions or one direction eventually. And then you want to do words linked to a demonstration, like we're making cookies and I want you to stir the batter like this. So you're giving them that physical demonstration, or sometimes pointing and saying, the eggs are right there. And you can just, without giving them to that person, you're using your visual cues or pointing. And then sometimes people don't understand kind of the tools that you might be expecting them to use. So giving them, like, brush your hair, brush your teeth, kind of giving them that visual cue that you're linked to the naming of the task. And then eventually maybe that person's going to need more cues, and you start them with the task, put the toothbrush in their hand and start them, and then, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing. Kind of help them start and stop. And then directing by touch, just moving their hands to something for picking up food. So there are lots of different ways that you can give people cues, and that's all part of communication. So it's a verbal, nonverbal, sometimes written, sometimes complicated, sometimes simple. It can be pretty complex, but there's a gradation of types and quantity of cues that you want to be thinking about using when you're giving your message. So then the next slide actually has kind of the same information, but in a little bit more of a pictured means, because that's another way that you can change up your cues. So telling somebody, these are your progression of cues, tell them to do something or point, give them that auditory cue, like your spoon's right here, or here's where, it is, you are in the directions. Sometimes written words are the next cue, pictures if they don't understand the written words, that demo, some kind of tactile cue, like, okay, start eating, just pat their arm, oh, take a bite. And starting and stopping the task for people hand over hand, and then total assist eventually. But there are lots and lots of variations in between these things, and people can, when we're communicating with them, we have to find out where that person's abilities are and what they can do. And this is a person with any kind of function. So where do they get stuck, and where do they work? Okay. And then help them with the parts that they can't work on. Because really the goal is for people, all of us, to be independent as long as possible throughout our lives. So really think about these. These are kind of important tips for you with the kinds of cues that you might be able to make. So these are my references, and I referenced those things in the PowerPoint by just the numbers that I had next to them. So lots of good information here that you can go out to some of the websites, and some of it's my own personal writing. So there you go for that.
And I should add at this point that a downloadable, printable version of the PowerPoint will be available on DuluthAgingSupport.org in the community conversations section. So people will be able to download this PowerPoint at a later date and get this great information. Before we move on to Char, I wanted to bring Mary Lou, if we could go back a couple of slides, and I wanted to draw your attention to the third bullet where you talked about avoiding patronizing speak. Would you give us some examples? I think this to me is a little bit of ageism. When people talk in a patronizing way, what are some examples for people? Because they may not know that how they're speaking to somebody is patronizing.
Did you forget your glasses again?
Yeah.
I can't believe that you forgot your glasses. I mean, how many times a day do I have to tell you where your glasses are? They're right on your head. Those kind of little digs, kind of, that's what I would call patronizing, and expecting people to have behaviors that are continuously. I mean, all of us are going to change as we age. And so we're all not going to do what we did before in the same way, regardless of what it is. But we have to just be gracious and kind to each other and think about, what my words can be weapons. And so how would I want to be treated? I mean, I always think about that. How would I want to be treated?
Right. So, Char, do you have any idea or anything to add regarding like patronizing language? Like,
I actually do and I talk a little bit about this as I go through my slides, but a great example of that is talking around someone and not including them in the conversation. This often happens at thinking about changeover, asking me as the caregiver being relieved what so-and-so needs when so-and-so is sitting right there, not including them in that conversation. Or when I would do marketing as a facility director, if I'm taking somebody around, I've seen people just talk to the family members and disregard the person who might actually be living in the facility in the future, not including them in conversation. And probably my best example is when my mother-in-law began showing signs and symptoms of dementia, and I brought her to her first doctor appointment. And at the point at which that doctor decided that she had something cognitive going on, he stopped talking to her and he began only talking to me. And we experienced that in every interaction we had with medical professionals. And I don't like the idea of stereotyping, but I do think it's just a behavior, and that physicians possibly are not terribly aware of them doing they're doing that. But really that's the biggest thing. And I also got called out by a client probably about 4 months ago because we were in the grocery store, and this person likes peaches that don't have sugar added to them. And I pointed up to them and I said, "Oh, there are the peaches that don't have sugar in them." And I was told that they were able to read.
yeah. So
I did not give that person credit for their own abilities.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Mary Lou. Thank you for this great information. I'm going to forward the slides back to where Char is going to take over. Do you see it, Char?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yep, I sure do. And thanks so much. That was very interesting, Mary Lou. I'm going to focus primarily on just working with people who are actually living with dementia and how to communicate with them because communicating with them is different than communicating maybe with other people. It takes a little bit more effort on the part of the person who is not living with dementia, in my opinion. But the ability to understand the spoken word actually changes as Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia progress. And you can see that from the early, the middle, and the late stages as you try to work with somebody or communicate with them. So early on in the disease, really that ability to grab a word, to, it's right on the tip of my tongue. I can almost see it. I just can't quite get it out. And the ability to describe a process, those things start to diminish. And that can create a lot of frustration for people who are living with dementia and for the person who's trying to communicate an idea or try to understand what they're trying to communicate to you. So these changes actually do place a much greater burden on the communicator for a successful communication. We have the bigger brain, so to speak. We don't have the dying parts of the brain. So we should be able to manage the communication, to help them manage the communication better, so that we have a reduction in frustration. Next slide, please. Oops. Okay. So just to reiterate what Mary Lou had said in her slide, we really need to make sure that they have all their assistive devices in place. Do they have their glasses on? Are they clean glasses? Do they have their hearing aids in place if that's appropriate? Do we have good lighting in the room? Is everything prepared with reduction of distractions so that you can have a good conversation? Are you looking at them, or are you, as Mary Lou talked about, are you yelling from another room or coming up from behind them? One of the most important things, I think, in communicating with somebody living with dementia is the idea that you really do need to make that visual contact with them first. Think of the artist thumb. This is from Teepa Snow's teaching. The artist thumb we see first, and those visual inputs are really so very important to people in general, but also particularly for those who are living with dementia. And then we make our verbal interaction with them. So our visual, and then our verbal interaction starts. In our verbal interactions, I'm doing it right now, running way too many words. We often tend to have way too many words to express the idea that we actually want to get across. And so be concise. Make sure that it's clear in concrete language. As mentioned before, we don't want to use descriptions like it's raining cats and dogs, or use some other type of metaphors or similes. Just use regular, everyday language. And where it's appropriate, add gestures to support your spoken word if you're not getting across that first way, So acknowledge the question. For example, if Mimi was asking me what time her appointment was, I might say, so you would like to know what time your appointment is. Your appointment is at 3 o'clock. We have plenty of time before then. So let's go over and have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. If I'm still not being understood, we can rephrase and reframe. We can find other ways to communicate the question or the idea. And there may be a point where you just have to give it up. Maybe that conversation isn't going to go where you want it to go, and we need to move on and redirect to something completely different because we're just not communicating anymore. We're not able to get through that piece of it at that particular time. I find that knowing a person's likes and dislikes really helps you connect back to their authentic self, that part of them that still is who they were in the past before a dementing illness got a hold of them. So if we know that person, then we can maybe use that to bridge communication sometimes if we're having trouble, to de-escalate a situation, to make a connection that's meaningful and helpful for them at that particular point in time, and for you. Next slide, please. I think I had one. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I think early on in the diagnosis, if you're working with somebody living with dementia, ask them how they would like to be helped. What would you like me to do if you get stuck on a word or stuck in an idea? Allowing them, as Mary Lou mentioned before, allowing them a lot of extra time for processing the concept. If we think about where hearing is, hearing is here through our ears, but it's processed here, and you don't necessarily it's not necessarily a hearing issue that they may be dealing with. Oftentimes it is a processing issue. So we have to, allow them the extra time that they need to actually process that conversation, that comment that you're making. And then, as we had previously talked about, really avoiding talking down to a person living with dementia and including them in all conversations when they're in the room. If you have to have a private conversation that you cannot or should not include them in, you should leave the room and have that conversation separately so that they don't feel excluded. One of the most challenging things, I think, as a caregiver is dealing with the repetitiveness. It can be very, very frustrating. So we may need to switch gears for them. And this is the analogy I would use, is that I have a manual transmission car. And if I leave my car in first gear for too long, my revolutions per minute get way too fast and it's hard on the engine, and I have to actually put that clutch in and shift it. And when we are working with somebody who's living with dementia, if they're stuck in that high gear and they're focused on a particular issue, we may need to help them get to a different gear and to a different place and de-escalate into a new activity in order to help them be more successful. And then, oftentimes that might be just taking a new direction with that particular conversation or question that they're stuck with, or trying to understand what's actually behind what they're asking. And really, that's all I have, unless there are questions or thoughts or concerns or something that somebody would want to bring forward as a caregiver or an interested party.
Go ahead,
I do
Mary
have a
Lou.
quick question. I was thinking about this, Char, when you're sharing. That's such good information. So what if you make a mistake? What if you don't use the right words or the right behaviors? I mean, what would you suggest? How would you handle that?
Typically, I go back to my TIPA snow training and I apologize. I will apologize to somebody. My incident with the peaches, I said, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. You're right.
Mm.
Or maybe if I'm not even right, it's sometimes being right isn't the best solution.
Yeah.
It doesn't result in what you want anyway. So sometimes you just got to move on. I oftentimes, if I have made a mistake, if somebody says, I already told you that, I've told you that a million times, I just go, you know what? That's my brain not working right today. I'm so sorry. I'll try to do better. I oftentimes just apologize, because most of the time, I really think many times the caregiver has unintentionally made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I often think that communication is often not about what you say, but how you feel
Mhm.
about the interaction. And so I think about that, especially when I'm dealing with older adults with sensory issues of any kind, maybe in particular someone with dementia, because we know that someone with dementia, their emotions are still there and really strong, even if they don't understand other things. So one thing that I've liked to say to people is, you're just be with the person where they're at. It doesn't matter if
Mhm.
it's, January and there's snow on the ground. If, you know, if they want to take a ride in the boat on the lake in the sunshine, find a way to be there, but then redirect. Is that on target
I
to
would
keep
say
them feeling
so.
good?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you hit a really good and important point, is that emotions um, are very, very high with people living with dementia. I consider them to be particularly primal. They can really feel your, I think, feel your real emotion. If you walk in a bad mood with the biggest smile on your face, they're gonna sense that very much. And when somebody gets a diagnosis, get diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or with Lewy body disease or any of the over 100 dementias that might be out, dementing illnesses that might be out there, there's a lot of anger and frustration. Why is this me? Why has this happened to me? Or even a normally aging person, why doesn't my body work the way it used to work? Why can't I have a over 90-year-old person that I work with that says, I just want to have the same body I had at 78. I mean, that's really not asking that much when you think about it. He's not asking to be 20. He's asking
Yeah.
just if I could just do what I could do when I was 78. I think there's a lot of frustration and anger as our bodies start to betray us, and even more so maybe when it's the mind, and particularly when someone has been very brilliant through their whole life and very successful. All of a sudden they can't remember how to spell the, or the word for that long yellow thing that I like to peel.
You bring
They
up
lose
another
that.
really good point,
And
though,
it's
Char. It's
frustrating.
humor. To inject humor when you can. I think really can solve a lot of things. Not fake humor or insulting
Absolutely.
humor, but kind of
Right.
caregiver laughing at themselves and bringing that person, with a disability of whatever into play too. Yeah. Kind of lighten the load a bit.
One thing I noticed
Yeah.
so Mary Lou, most of your presentation focused on effective communication strategies for older adults in general. And then Char took a deeper dive into tips for caregivers of those with dementia. And one thing I noted is there are a lot of overlapping strategies. And so really I think it's just people in general. If we could follow some of the strategies that both of you put forward, I think we would be more effective communicators in general. So boy, do I ever really appreciate your time today. I want to make sure that if you have any last thoughts or tips, that you have a chance to share them before we close out our session.
I think what I like to what I like to go out with is, enjoy the person who you're with and be present with them. And, you only have that day. And so just to be kind and gentle with yourself and with other people.
I love that. Yeah. Char, how about you?
I don't have any big words of wisdom. I don't. I just think that's a good technique, a good idea. Just be kind as you can be every day, and try to be the best communicator you can, because it will certainly, we see that in our current world today, that communication is very important, and how we say things and what we say.
It's so important. Well, I am so grateful to both of you. Both of you have been in this field for a very long time and have incredible expertise from different viewpoints. And I'm really grateful. Both of you provide your own professional services. And so I encourage whoever's watching this to go to DuluthAgingSupport.org, and we will have a listing of how you can contact Char, who's now working with Dementia Friendly Duluth, Mary Lou, who has now a business called Positive Dementia Paths. We will have information on how you can contact both of our wonderful caregiver experts here directly. So thank you again, ladies. And I just want to remind everybody that if you do want a printout version of the PowerPoint, it's accessible on the website. Mention it again, DuluthAgingSupport.org. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day, and we will see you next month.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.